Good morning to all of you. A very warm welcome. I know that there is a lot of competition in the House today with a lot of events which are taking place in parallel, so I think we have the best audience that we could hope for. And it's those who are here that are important, so I'm sure we're going to have an interesting conversation. Now we're here to the launch of the edition of the International Journal of Labor Research, and we have chosen to call it this time The Future of Work, Trade Unions in Transformation. And I'm very pleased that one of the authors that has contributed to the journal, Professor Jelle Visser from the University of Amsterdam, has kindly accepted our invitation to discuss in more depth the contents of his paper. And this paper is very relevant because it is about the revitalization of trade unions. And to be very blunt, this is a theme which is related to the journal as a whole. I'm also happy to say that we will have a video message from Aqua Britvum. Aqua has been one of the contributors to the journal, and she has written on women's future of work, mostly on the role of gender equality in the Ghanaian informal economy. Mamadou is telling me that the quality of the sound of this message is not very good, but I think it's worth making a try and listening to it. Now, as I was saying, the whole area of the revitalization of the labor movement is very important because we have seen a number of fundamental changes that are affecting the labor movement. We know that on one hand, the labor movement has got to deal with the growing precariousness of labor and with the informal economy, not just in the developing world, but also in the developed world. We know that the levels of inequality do not stop growing across the world. And we also know that this has an effect on the erosion of workers' rights and, of course, more economic growth and more investment, which everyone would like to achieve, are affecting negatively the livelihood of workers everywhere. And this is the reason why we have chosen to have that as the thread throughout the different articles we have in our journal. Now, when you start looking at the articles, you will see that there is an in-depth analysis of issues such as the effects of new technologies on how work and production are governed, the increased role of trade unions in promoting a just transition, how certain groups, such as women or young workers, are affected by the growing fragmentations we see in the labor market, but also recommendations as to how we can increase the voice of these people in the trade union structures. It's not just bringing them in, it's also bringing them a place and a voice. And I think that there is one undeniable aspect that we may consider, those of us who have been so active in the trade union movement for so many years in the past, is that it is painfully apparent for the last years that trade unions are in decline all over the world. And it's a fact, and it's a fact that is undeniable. And it is a fact because their ability to transform, their ability to attract new groups of workers that are outside of the traditional trade union sphere of influence, and it is a fact because although wanting to be the central voice in the fight for social justice, for inclusive and prosperous societies, is still so relevant, and it's probably the only way unions will be considered as relevant as they were in the past in the future. And I would like to say that from an ACTRAV perspective, we have used the Future of Work initiative and the centenary year, which is coming to an end, as a very important platform to discuss all these issues with the labor movement in all its different formations and at the global level. Now, I would also have to say that the Centenary Declaration or the report of the Global Commission are important contributions that have helped us guiding our conversations and also has helped us fulfill our mandate in terms of ACTRAV within the ILO, but also assisting workers' organizations in understanding that if they want to continue fulfilling their mandate for social justice, there are transformations that need to happen, and these are fundamental challenges that lie ahead the trade union movement. We have chosen to give an active voice to workers in the run-up to the centenary year, and we have contributed to this initiative with a number of activities that we have done across the globe. We have organized 2 global symposia. We have organized 5 regional and 3 sub-regional conferences. We have organized a total of 6 international trainings on the future of work. And we have chosen to do this because we felt it was necessary to have a bottom-up approach and to make sure that the discussions and the deliberations that were taken at the regional level would include the key challenges that workers face in each region of the globe in terms of its sustainability and its capacity to remain relevant in the future. And I would say that one of the key messages that came out of all the conferences that we have organized, and which is also the core message we have in the journal, is that the future is not something exogenous. It's not something that just happens and over which we have no control. And I think this was probably a thread present in all the activities we have done over the last 3 years. And I think that the trends that we have witnessed today do pose challenges, but also at the same time, and I think that's the way we would like trade unions to look at it, is that they provide a lot of great opportunities for workers and workers' organizations. And it's putting the stress on the opportunities that are there, that need to be taken and that need to be explored, that we would want to continue our reflections in the future following the centenary year. And I think at our last symposium, and Jelle was present there as well, we could see that there was a certain sense of optimism on the part of the participants in the symposium, and also the understanding that there is urgency to act, and that there is urgency to act because the changes to workers are so deep that trade unionists will have to act and have to be commit in terms of making change happen. And in order to do that, they cannot just be spectators, they have to be actors of that change. So I'm therefore very proud to present to you the journal, and the journal which has been elaborated in the course of the different sessions that we have had, pinpointing who should be the contributors to the journal, having a regional balance, having a sex balance in terms of the people that have contributed to our journal. And I think that the journal provides important recommendations for workers across the globe, and especially on how to tackle the most profound challenges of the future of work. So I hope you will find it an interesting read. And I would like to express my thanks to all those that have contributed to the edition of this number of our journal, what I consider to be an excellent outcome. This, of course, includes my colleagues in ACTRAV who have been part of the editorial board of the journal, but I would like to give a special thanks to Michael and to Mamadou, because they are the ones who have made sure that we have this publication with us today. So thank you very much to all of you. I think we've done a good job. Now, I would like to move on, and I would like to ask Mamadou to play the message that we have from Aqua Britum, as I said, on women and gender equality in the informal sector in Ghana. I think you will need to put your headphones, because this being the employer's room, there are no loudspeakers. So we need to use the headphones, which we don't have up here. So I think we have to go.
No, we have.
Oh, we do? Oh, yes, we do. They're here. Okay. And Mamadou, please go ahead.
Warm greetings from Ghana, and want to express my deepest appreciation to the organizers who have brought me on board the event in this manner. Second, I want to congratulate the team whose hard work is making this event possible. Publishing academic work on any subject is a challenge, especially getting people to work within set deadlines and coordinating the numerous administrative and associated tasks. Such a collection discussing the world of work in the future allows us to pick up the debate from other perspectives, bringing on board communities or constituencies that are otherwise invisible. In my particular case, it has been a focus on women and informality. Looking at the specific case of Ghana, I noted in my paper how academic discussions on work in recent times focus on the impact of the fourth industrial revolution and how its drivers are dramatically altering the performance and location of work. I bring on board the disquiet of academic communities, activists, especially feminists, who criticize the Western-centeredness of dominant discussions on the subject for assuming that all work forms are governed by the capitalist standard employment relations. Such projections, they explain, ignore the types of work that most of the world's labor force are engaged in, discounting gendered labor markets and workplaces, as well as informal employment. Therefore, I join the calls to widen the debate to reflect the reality of Africa, for example, and efforts to address the gap that still struggle to connect the two issues adequately: gendered labor markets and informalized labor markets. My contribution used information from key publications on the work of the future and attempted to highlight the lessons that can be used to direct the debate on the gendered implications of informality in the work of the future. Of course, focusing on women, in Ghana, I noted how they dominate the informal economy, with about 91% of the working women in Ghana being in informal employment as against 81% for working men. I also note that women's share of the formal employment is on the decline, and also mention rural-urban variations. While rural women are more likely to be engaged as own account and contributing family workers, women in the urban spaces are more likely to be self-employed traders, many without employees. Additional issues I bring on board is the high levels of decent work deficits for both females and males in the informal economy. I note in particular that the constraints for women in the informal economy is the fact that their working relations tend to be shaped by sociocultural norms and practices. And especially since the sector escapes formal regulations and legislative cover, women find themselves having to operate under paternalistic norms which give owners of enterprises or productive resources, especially land, unquestionable authority over all who work for them. Paternalistic attitudes are even more complicated for women in marital unions that work within household enterprises, where the enterprise heads tend to be their husbands. I note though that one of the key drivers of the work of the future, being digitalization, has seen significant uptake in Ghana. But despite this significant uptake, we still have a gender-digital divide. But then Ghanaian women are still utilizing various digital platforms for their work, especially women with secondary and tertiary education who use it for trading their wares. Traders also in the informal sector, especially women with low educational background, use mobile phones to transmit information, connect with their clients, make and receive payments. And one area has been mobile banking and payment systems via mobile phones. But then I also note that such digitalization, despite being gendered, is also class-based, and it's not all women that have complete access. Therefore, I also note that the hallmarks, and I would like to highlight this, that the hallmarks of women's employment and how they are set to change for the future are about questions of where they work and how they work, and how the social and cultural conditions that bring with them gender structures set women's labor market into a form of disadvantage that they have to contend with. The degree of their disadvantage, I contend, are also marked by the economic conditions of their nations. By way of recommendations, I mentioned the fact that addressing the gender dimensions of work of the future will call for policies that are far removed from the existing women-focused strategies, such as capacity building interventions or macro credit schemes. Such approaches, far from questioning mainstream social structures, appear to position women as responsible for the existing patriarchal systems that leads to their lower status and are set to complicate their workplaces and working conditions within the future workplace. Therefore, for us, and in the discussions that I position, I raise the fact that the main drivers of the future of work and what lies behind them must be continually questioned, particularly the capitalist for-profit ethos, for it is here that the intensification of precarity and insecurity is set to intensify. I also would want to stress the fact that, and I do in my contribution, that while labor activists and feminists and other social groups work to institute alternative forms of production relations, which is key to the future, there is need for short-term measures that can reduce the negative and gendered impact of work of the future. Such measures will first have to target the discourses that place primary responsibility for citizens' welfare on the state and its institutions. And I also want to point and say that we need to highlight corporate responsibility. In addition, there will be need to reposition social reproduction away from households into the public space, with specific demands on capital to pick up the cost. This will, for example, demand devolution of public childcare and elder care policies, with public provisioning of care institutions that all can access. Other policies could include universal provisions of various forms of non-contributory social security schemes, financed through taxes, with corporate capital making the largest share. Legislative reforms to labor instruments will also be needed, and such legislative reforms should recognize own account workers and those who otherwise are self-employed. For it is out of such efforts that effective mechanisms for dealing with emerging work-related precarity associated with the Fourth Industrial Revolution can evolve. Thank you all, and I wish you all a successful lunch.
I think the presentation by Aqua Britfum has triggered in us the need to go and take a look at the articles that have been written. I think it is very important to start from the fact that decent work deficits are a reality in most of our societies, and that in most of the cases the economic models that are being followed are not gender friendly or are not women's friendly. And I think that's the heart of the conversation. That's where the conversation needs to start in order to overcome the decent work deficits for women, both in the formal and in the informal economy. I don't think that there is a divide in that regard, because it touches women on both grounds. I think it's also important the reference that she makes regarding the cultural and the social influence in how gender equality is more or less promoted in our societies. And I think that this is also food for thought, not just in terms of the increase of the gender divide, not just in the digitalization, but the recognition that the gender divide is still a reality in most of our societies, no matter the big progress that we have seen over the years, no matter the contribution that the ILO has made through its international labor standards and its tripartite structures. We're still not there. We're still not there. And clearly, where you are born matters in these matters. It shouldn't. It shouldn't. So I think it's a very inspiring article that would give us food for thought, and that should give us the possibility to move on with these conversations. Now, Professor Jelle Visser, do you really think that unions can revitalize themselves? That's what we would like to hear from you.
Well, you know, thank you very much for inviting me, first of all. And you know, one of the dangers that there is in life is that you become tempted by wishful thinking. Yeah, you wish that, like the title of the journal, that unions will transform themselves and become a very relevant factor for all the good reasons that there are, such as indeed pushing for more gender equality, pushing for more influence of workers on the design of the jobs, especially when jobs in the future are going to be much more than now determined by artificial intelligence, are much more subject to types of supervision about which you want to have some control what's happening. So, yeah, I mean, there is the danger of wishful thinking. That's why I started at the other end and said, okay, that's an important issue now when we're discussing the future of work. I'll come back to that. But let's first take stock. Where are we? Where are unions? How does it look? If we take a hard look at them, what is the state of unions? And then, yes, you discover a couple of not so pleasant realities. That they are, if you look at the past 30 or so years, in decline. Their high mark in the Western sphere was in the 1970s, when we indeed had debates on how unions could influence technology, the content of work, when collective bargaining was expanding. And then there came a phase of increased unemployment, of increased instability, of course, globalization, competition for jobs, especially at the bottom end of the labor market, which then displaced many workers. And I want to say unions didn't always have the right answer. There can be many things said about that, but about that time. And whatever the precise causes, unemployment is surely one of them, unions went in retreat. Politically, economically, but also in terms of membership. And what I demonstrate in this piece, that the most manifest element of that retreat is basically the decline in reaching the youth. And that's the most dangerous aspect of it. I'm very happy that I see in the journal that there is a piece about young people in Africa. I already mentioned this also in my report, that my part is also based on data that exists too much about the OECD countries. And that, of course, in a continent like Africa, which is a young continent, where more than half of the population is under the age of 25, where also jobs, especially in the informal economy, but also elsewhere, are jobs that need to be there for young people. And so it is very good to think that trade unions are part of that world. But the problem nevertheless remains that in the rich countries, where unions have most resources, that it is a problem to keep or to attract or to reach out to young people, which has a lot to do, and then I come to my second theme, with a number of societal changes. We can talk about education, about other ways in which young people manifest themselves. You only have to look around now in the world about all the manifestations that are happening all over the planet. Protests, more or less radical, more or less motivated by economic causes, inequality first of all. Some, of course, look at Hong Kong or now some places in Latin America also by political causes, that is to say authoritarianism, young people who want to have more say over their own future. But then that raises the questions, where are the trade unions? Are they part of this? Can they take on this agenda of the future of work, I would say the future of work and life? And so it's here that that my thinking is. So when I say, when you question, can unions or will unions revitalize? I cannot answer definitely, but I know the condition. And the condition is that unions have to find a way to organize or to express the concerns of young people. And then I say immediately, maybe this type of organization looks very different from what we have. So it's maybe a different type of unionism, or how to be a unionist, or how to associate yourself with a project that's called unionism. Because I have the feeling that it will be more of a commitment for a cause than a commitment for an organization. And of course I have to be very careful here not to be too easy and say, okay, let unions be social movements. That's not just the issue. But I have somehow the feeling that unions have to all over the planet, and it's interesting to hear from African experiences, the unions have to go out and find out not only what young people want, we have some social research about that, but also how they want it, how they want to go about it, what kind of organization or what kind of support, etc., can be helpful for them. And of course, unions have to put a face on it. So I have been thinking a lot about the one success story, or almost success story, of trade unions has been that in the past 30-something years, women have massively joined unions. Okay, that was a little bit thanks to, of course, the public sector, but not only. But in many areas, unions have gained a lot from, not only have they gained women, but they have also gained a lot from women. The agendas, in many countries at least, have changed. So issues of work-life balance, work-family balance, interrupted work because women have children and are the ones that still take most of the task associated with children. These kind of agendas have changed in unions, in collective bargaining. So here, and one important discussion in all of this was, okay, more women in the unions, but now they should also be in the negotiating committees, or in the leadership, or in how unions present themselves to the outside world. So I think in this sense there has also been a transformation. Just as in my own things in universities, when we hire people, we have now equal rules for men and women, gender neutrality, and all these balances. But the important change happened only when we decided that in any committee hiring people or judging people, there should be women equal. It's not just the rules, it's also the people. So in this sense, yes, unions have changed. But now the next question is, can you do the same with respect to young people? So getting more of them in positions where they have some authority in negotiating, where they have some presence in how unions feature themselves. So that is, for me, the condition. Yeah? I still think there are some hopeful signs. I find, for instance, nowadays, I don't know, just in the weekend I read a book called Unbound. It's a fantastic book. I recommend it. So what does inequality do? And now even hardcore capitalists begin to realize that too much of inequality is really too much. That's to say, it endangers growth, it endangers investment, especially in education. It endangers, of course, we all know social cohesion, but it will put a rot to a lot of things that we treasure about, and democracy is the most important of them. So this book paints a number of these consequences of inequality, not the causes, which we can also discuss, but the consequences. Now, in this context, it's becoming important that international organizations that cannot be accused of socialism begin to think, okay, can collective bargaining and can trade unions as countervailing power be a corrective, be helpful in bending this trend of ever greater inequality? It won't be easy, because we also realize it cannot be done solely through tax redistribution. We have to think about the primary division of income, which is affected by wages and by collective bargaining. And we have to find a way in which we are living through a phase, sometimes, at least I read this in the literature, which is not unlike 19th century, begin 20th century capitalism. When at that time the big companies in steel, iron, transport, railways, oil, were the ones that made incredible amounts of money. And there was growth, yes, but you didn't want to live in London at that time, described by Dickens, or in Manchester described by Engels, or other places where it was really terrible. Now, the difference from now is that we still have elections, democracy, people participate, and we have still basic social insurances. So it's not, in this sense, the comparison, you have to be careful. Although this may not be true if you look at India to that extent, or to other places on this planet. So the question is, how can we today get control and tame companies like Amazon, Apple? Okay, I can go on with the list. Yeah? And the tremendous differences in wealth. And so can we think of unions and collective bargaining as a sort of correction mechanism, and in the sense of, and this was even formulated by the OECD last week when they presented their book, of how to share out the incredible productivity gains made by very few companies, incredibly powerful and large and able to influence politics, to share out these gains through a much wider population, and collective bargaining is an instrument in this respect. There's a second reason why I would emphasize this. I'm now studying a little bit artificial intelligence and what it will do. And the reports on what it will do to our jobs are different. But one thing comes very much on top. The degree to which workers will influence the jobs, so the combination of artificial intelligence and jobs, for instance, in healthcare, or in the production of medicine, or in education, the acceptance of these jobs and the resistance to them all depends very much on whether workers are involved. There is very interesting research now going on in different, and comes out in different publications. So here again, I'd say a role for unions is there. Can they get it? Yeah? And it means there comes this challenge that unions have to be both in the forefront, so skilled people, you have to organize skilled people who can help designing jobs and discuss it and etc. And of course unions are there for the ones that lose in this process, because there will also be a lot of jobs lost. And there will be new jobs, but they're not the same jobs. So here is again another aspect. So I can give good reasons why unions are needed, why collective bargaining is a good thing. And we don't have to refer only to rights and so on, but that there is, I can't see much of an alternative. But there is a very big challenge as to can unions meet this need? Can they do it? And it would be so great if, and if this journal and all your activities can contribute, that is fantastic. That unions realize that they are standing in front of this challenge, that nothing will be the same, and that it is not good to ritualistically continue with what you're doing. I get now from time to time, on the basis of this report that I did for ACTRAV, invitations from unions to talk with them, good. Which is, I think, a good, well, maybe not good, but I think it's nice, to discuss. And yes, then I start to tell them, I'm not Greta Thunberg, so I cannot do this show, but I'm telling them, yeah, you don't have a lot of time. Yeah, it's now, and there is a moment. There is an international moment also, because if some of these organizations in the OECD and others begin to talk about you and your collective bargaining and your activities as something that needs to be in the equation and is not just an obstacle, then there is a moment to grasp, but there is still a lot of work to be done regarding young people. So I'm happy with, and now I conclude, I'm happy that you chose the title Trade Unions in Transformation. Not only because jobs are transformed and the world transforms and things change, and maybe at this point a bit quicker than normal, but also they themselves have to transform. Yeah. They will have to do things different than they did. Okay, that's my message.
Thank you very much. I think that the need to do things differently is probably the bottom line of all these conversations we've been having. And as I said in the introduction, I think that in general, when we were exposed to trade unions across the globe, this was always part of our conversations. And I have to say that most of the unions do recognize that they have to do differently. Problem is between the recognition and the action. And that's where a lot more probably needs to be done and needs to be promoted. I mean, we cannot impose it, we can only facilitate the conversations and the discussions and the awareness. And that's why the document that we have published and that you have contributed to, or you've been the author of, is so important. because we just need to awaken the interest and the realization that there is no return if nothing is done. And I think that's probably the most complex message to get across, but the most important message to get across. I just want to say that we are in the point of finalizing a survey we have done across the world on young people and trade unions. It's not yet final, but it will be final. And I have to say that, I mean, I've just read a draft, and I found a lot of surprises, right? Interesting and encouraging stories, which I hope will also be, together with your document, part of the literature that we want to give to trade union organizations, because there are interesting things being done, as there are interesting things being done in relation to unions and the workers in the informal economy, as there are interesting things being done in relation to unions and women in different parts of the world. I think unions have a huge difficulty in conveying the messages about the good things that they do, and they still do a few good things. So there is a problem of communication in the way the message gets across to the wider public. But there is certainly a problem of awareness and really to go back to basics. And as you say, it's very interesting to see the last report of the OECD, which is, again, putting collective bargaining at the heart of the economic and social development. Now, I recall when I was in the ETUC, the terrible conversations we had with the OECD in relation to their ideological stance regarding collective bargaining, or the difficult discussions I had with the IMF and the Troika on the role of collective bargaining and their ideological approach to decentralization at no cost. So it seems that there is a certain return to that. Are unions ready to embrace that challenge? It's the big question. And the other big question is, are they ready to say we need to move away? And I share that with you, and I've been sharing that, and I think everyone in this room has shared that, with the fact that we cannot go on with the business as usual and just think, well, we're still strong in the traditional sectors, public sector now. I mean, we know how much the public sector is shrinking. We know all the different transformations going on in the public sector. Artificial intelligence is a reality in the public sector. How far do unions in the public sector understand that this is something which is part of their challenges as well? So, I mean, we can only contribute to raise the awareness. We cannot do instead of, and I'm glad I'm no longer part of that. But I mean, I think we have the responsibility as the ILO to continue raising this awareness, and I think that the centenary has been a good opportunity to put these conversations back on the table. While I say that we have heard a lot of positive messages from different unions in different parts of the world, I have also to say that there are those who have not yet grasped that reality. And so probably that's got to be more our target in the coming period. So just to say that for us, this is not the end of a process. This is the start of a process, and this is something which will continue being part of the activities and the actions that ACTRAV will do. I have to say that we have discussed last week at our retreat on the need to have a module on trade unions in the balance, so that we can use that in every activity that ACTRAV does everywhere in the world, be it a political conversation, be it a training activity, be it a workshop, whatever. This has got to be part of the conversation, and that's what we have asked our colleagues across the world to put that on the agenda. So thank you very much. I'm sure that there are comments from the part of the colleagues. So who wants to open the hostilities? Yeah, Verena, please.
Good morning. My name is Verena Schmidt from InWork, the branch for inclusive labor institutions and collective bargaining. And thanks so much for this interesting presentations. And I think you are giving us some hope in terms of Europe and in terms of gender, how much has been achieved, I think, also due to the ETUC and the strong campaign the ETUC did on this. So I was saying in Europe, I think there has been a lot of progress in terms of gender, and also outside of Europe in advanced countries like Australia and Canada, where we see a lot of female representative leadership. But I think also outside of Europe, especially in parts of Africa and Asia and South America, there still needs a lot to be done in terms of gender and in terms of union renewal in general. And one topic, I think, which ACTRAV has worked a lot about, the informal economy, I think is also, in addition to young people, in addition to bringing young people in, and is extremely important to grasp, given that we have countries with 90% informal economy in Africa. And I think this is extremely important also to tackle. Also informalization in parts of Europe and parts of North America, as you mentioned, and as also ACTRAV mentioned. I think ACTRAV also made an important point about that it's partially what Maria Elena mentioned about culture, but where you come from, but also she mentioned class, that class plays an important role. And I think here the unions, it's also important to have some kind of probably it's old-fashioned to say class identity, but some kind of workers' identity. I mean, now we have in Europe and North America, there's a threat of, increasing threat of populism, extreme right. And this, at least in Germany, they do very detailed analysis, I'm sure in other countries as well, about who voted what. And you see that traditional working class people now vote for the extreme right. So I think this is also a very important topic for the unions to grasp with. And I think your research is and the research that Raphael has been doing with you is extremely important to grasp all these topics. But I think a lot needs to be done also in all countries. And as you say, it needs to be done now. So.
Yeah. Thank you. I'm Lena Olsen. I work in ACTRAV, Bureau for Workers' Activities. You said that particularly after the 70s, union went in retreat, particularly on issues regarding economy, social issues, and then that the union has been declining in reaching the youth. You also mentioned Greta Thunberg, and do you think that the unions, or what are your views of the unions in order to capture youth, how they can rejuvenate through using the climate agenda, the environmental agenda? You're mentioning, manifestations, social and economic manifestations, but there is also huge manifestations now regarding climate. And do you have any views on how unions can, use that to take advantage, if not very good word to say, take advantage of those climate manifestations on capturing the youth?
Yeah, thank you, Yael, again. And I think the journal is indeed a result. For me, it's really particularly good also that it starts with the Pepe Mujica's words that brought us back to our first meeting, thinking of the future of work, and I think also the political representation. Indeed, to me, it's like there is a lot of good stuff. I just scroll. I didn't read all the things, but the two key pieces here to me, and there is a lot of good stuff in all the others, are indeed this one that Jelle Visser made it, and the piece of Nora Ratzel, David Uzel on the future of humanity and the future of work, because I think in these two pieces we are addressing, it's like indeed, how do we want to bring in terms of, it's like of message. If I take what Jelle, you said about the high marks of the 70s, in the 70s I was a student, and I remember that for us, when we would have the rally or the marches, our highest point is when our march was led by workers, by the trade unions, because that was the recognition, and we were part of a movement, and we were like, just like the trade unions in that moment was giving not only, a response to the workers, but was giving the response to society. And so this is where I think also, that's why these two pieces are important, because indeed, as you said also, Lene, it's like we need to have, the unions need to have the courage, not only to bring new actors, and so the young people, but also to have, to me, what is your vision for society, including, and I would say, because if they need to stay unions, and not, and here indeed it's, I would like you to go further on your analysis of the commitment for the causes more than organization. I think that there is already something like that. I think that there are some unions that are doing this, but on somehow, you are a trade union, not from a corporatives or protectionist purpose, but if you are trade union, it's because you represent the world of work, you represent the workers. So I really think it's this what we have to insist. For example, I think that really rethinking, the GDP, the industrial policies, the infrastructure, it's something that the unions need to do this, But I think that what actually Hilma Mote, who has now become a colleague in ACTRAV, she has a very nice expression in the piece, indeed, about the young people. She said unions have done a band-aid approach. I think that for the time being, we have done a band-aid approach. Once in a while, you have the youth committee. It's like, I must say, the women's is changing, but it started with the same band-aid approach. Women's committee that didn't count for anything. Now it's changing. But on the other hand, I really think, how do we make sure that, you stay trade unions, so representing the workers' voice, working in a different way? For me, one way is also, for example, the essay of some of the global unions to have global framework agreements is very narrow, is still something that has to be done better. But for example, the other day when Inditex and Industrial signed the global framework agreements, creating for the first time a real transnational committee, also from the worker side, it's a good sign for the futures. But for me, it's really like how do we have a transformative agenda remaining at trade unions? Because honestly, if the unions start being social actors like any other, maybe it works, but then there would be something else. Then we have to say it was a glorious history, it's over, and I still think there is a need for representing the workers' voice, however they will be declined in the future.
Thank you so much, Jelle, for this presentation. You presented as a kind of a positive trend, increased female membership, but if I understood it correctly, it's rather, instead of kind of more women joining the union, kind of more male unionized jobs getting lost that provide for that positive figure. So if you could further delve into that.
Well, thank you very much for, these are all parts of a conversation where we have to think more, and I don't have the answers. But a few points. when I was writing this report, maybe again, because it was years ago that I'd done that, I tried to study a little bit the realities of the informal economy that Verena was.
The headphones?
Okay, the informal economy, and I was, in a sense, positively struck, thanks to a whole series of reports done by the Danish trade unions on different places in Africa, Asia, and Latin America, in which they documented a number of initiatives that had been taken, sometimes by trade unions, sometimes by organizations. Ah, that's it.
No, I don't know. I'm trying to find this.
Okay. Yeah, can I go on or should I stop? But anyway, so I found a number of initiatives. It was interesting to see what kinds of mixes there were. And there, in some places, and I can't detail this now, but in some places it was done by organizations, civil rights organizations, non-governmental organizations, sometimes supported by unions or other organizations from rich countries, but sometimes by the teachers' unions that are the strongest normally in many of these countries. And there were also reports as to sometimes that this was a shift in leadership or parts of leadership changes from men to women, not always successful, from older, well, in societies where being an elder is very important still to young people, allowing them to do things for themselves. So I explored this and I mentioned a little bit in my report, but I think here is a world to study. This is my first point. My second point is the issue in renewing trade unions is two. One, I mentioned already, that's innovation, or to become more innovative in your methods and in your message. But the other one is, of course, inclusion. You see, the biggest challenge we know when we studied the welfare state, the biggest challenge is how to keep the middle class in while you do policies that benefit the people who are poor and have less chances when they start life, children, whatever. And to keep these two together, which is the same challenge for unions, as you ask me. How to keep the skilled, the somewhat better protected.
Maybe it's before the laptop.
Use that one. Use that microphone, maybe. If it's...
I'll use this one.
Yeah.
Then the beep goes, maybe. But so this is for unions the same challenge. How to stay relevant, important in terms of collective bargaining and in terms of your social security policies and whatever, for, let's say, the somewhat solid middle range of jobs and the people that occupy these jobs, which is still the ones that are regularly employed, have some rights and so on. And at the same time, become inclusive. And this is the political challenge. And that's exactly, in my opinion, one of the dangers of populist turns, whether they are left or right wing. But they have easy solutions in the sense of, we're going to help all the poor, or we're going to, etc., defend this particular group, and disrespecting some of the subtleties that are necessary to keep it important for all. Now this is and then I come to my second point, that is, when I plead for unions being different or doing things different, etc., I have always in mind also this thing that I have not yet found a better instrument than collective bargaining. So you can, of course, think about something different, but then you come to basically state legislation, minimum wages or living wage movements or things of that instead of collective bargaining. And then exactly the relevance for, let's say, the middle range of jobs is lost. And as you know from minimum wage legislation, important as it is, it becomes subject to political targeting. Yeah? So it is okay, under protest, Macron decides to raise it, yeah? But if he can get away with it, he doesn't. And this is France, but you can think about the United States, how it's done, or in Spain for years, didn't change. It's very low. So here, I still think there is no replacement for collective bargaining. Now, if that's true, that of course sets also certain limits as to the change of unions, because they have to be relevant as negotiator and also as enforcer. But okay, this is for me the tension in the debate about change. And then the final point on what you said about environmental issues. I have a colleague who runs the European Trade Union Institute in Brussels, Philippe Pochet, who years ago started to write about greening of the economy and why this should be an issue for trade unions. And it took long, but I think it's becoming a bit more part of the discourse. Now I understand immediately that's not an easy. It's not an easy thing. If you are a union in the car business, if you are the IG Metall in Germany, you know, where about, I think, so they have 2 million, about 1.5 million jobs depend on it, on cars, and they are still heavy polluters. But they now realize that it has to be changed. But I think in thinking about, for unions, in thinking about jobs, investment, future, also how technology should be used, then of course greening cannot be, or environmental issues cannot be a secondary thought. It has to be upfront there, as the way you think about what has to be done. The same way as you think about how to be socially protected. And in this sense, so it has to be part of your agenda. There is no way around it. And this is also true, I think, if you think about waste collection or lots of activities in the informal sector. But I sometimes use this example of Greta Thunberg. I'm very careful in reading the German newspapers. I live in Germany. And it really, if you look a bit more at the right of the political spectrum, there are many older white males. They are very angry. It's incredibly angry, and they each time they say, "Oh, it's a hype. There's some people behind her who do this. It's not her. Yeah, it's not." And at the same time, I'm talking to. I have young children. I talk to this other group, and they see something. And all of a sudden, there is a spark of God. Is this our future? And there is also a terrible debate, by the way, about that the 68 generation, of which I am part, have done everything wrong. So far, we have screwed up, no?
little by little, yes.
Yeah, you are younger, but you also.
I'm a part of that. I'm
Yeah,
part
but
of
we screwed it up.
as well.
Just
So, and that's also not very productive to have a discussion about guilt or something. But for me, I really think the importance was how an issue that, of course, was always there, slumbering, was put spot on the agenda, is there represented. And when I make the comparison with trade unions, I wish also, not in competition, but the issue of inequality is put in the same way on the agenda and in the mindset of people. And of course, it is maybe more difficult, I said that also in my presentation when I was here earlier, more difficult to put a number on it, although some of these numbers are staggering. So in climate change, we put a number on it. It is the heating of the planet, and we can see the effects now more and more in devastating catastrophes, in wildfires or in flooding. And that, as usual, well, with wildfires in California and in Australia, doesn't only hit poor people, but we know that rich people have more possibilities to take precaution or get out of there. So I would say, yes, we have to work also on raising the kind of consciousness on inequality. And like with climate change, there will be not an easy one-dimensional discourse as to how to deal with it, but already important, there will be a discourse. And then unions will be part of that discourse. That was my thinking about greening. So the worst that unions can do is to let there come a divide between the two issues. I think that would be a dangerous situation where you are played off against each other.
Thank you. Okay, I think unless there is any other burning comment that someone would like to make. Yes, Greta?
I was thinking about the climate change and Greta Thunberg and this because it's something that is mainstream now. Can you hear me? Yeah? And a fear that I have is that in order to be able to walk along what is in the mainstream now, trade unions might forget the role that they played in the past in representing the working class in the labor market and in the capitalism society by focusing on a symptom and not the cure. So, for instance, now in Italy we have a very important trade union dispute which involves almost 4,000 workers, and it's a company that in the south that produces, it's a steel company, and there is a problem because, of course, it's very polluting and the thousands of people die every year. But you know, when the trade union were asked, representatives were asked, so what's the plan? Because there is an agreement between the ArcelorMittal and the state that took the responsibility to employ these people for longer and to improve and to change the way that the steel was produced. But then nothing happened, and the trade unions are divided. Plus, it seems that they don't know exactly the direction they want to take, and some of them are addressing the problem of the greening economy and the thing that has, the production, the way of the production has to be green and sustainable. But then I have the impression that they're not anymore. Sometimes they are not anymore able to put the direction which is the point of reference in the political agenda, and which it's not there anymore in the government. And so I fear that if the trade union, to sum up, if the trade union lose a bit or forget the role they play toward the working class, then these political gaps that we see everywhere, and the fact of easy solutions on the right side, right parties, won't be able to talk to the people that they should represent anymore in the future.
have to, Ursula. We have 5 minutes.
You know, I just wanted to refer also what you said regarding, on one hand, to attract the middle class, but on the other hand, to be inclusive. And I think this is really key, because I'm social protection, social security, and I want to expressively say also social security specialist, because we see, for example, in the field of and also with regard to the ILO in social protection, social security, that everything goes only to social protection. There's hardly any work anymore on social security. And, you know, I think if the trade unions also lose out and do not work anymore for the middle class, for, you know, issues like, for example, social security, we will lose a lot of people. And I think it will contribute to widening also the gap, the inequality, the gap between rich and poor.
Thank you very much. I think it's been a very interesting conversation. We could go on the whole day, and I'm sure we would find some solutions, hopefully. I don't know. I think that you cannot either, I mean, let's go back to Philippe Pochet. Yeah. And the reason why the European trade unions embraced the agenda of climate change, and Joël Decaillon at the time, you remember, was because the EU had presented a directive on chemicals called REACH. And that's what triggered, all of a sudden, the whole interest of us in Europe to say, uh-oh, we have a problem here. And from then on, I don't say that there has been a lot of speed on the way the E2C has been addressing this, but there was a trigger effect that has provoked the interest, and then started studying and do a lot of stuff on climate change. And I think today that they have a good position in that regard. The issue, in my view, is how trade unions continue doing their role in terms of representation and negotiation. And I completely agree with you, collective bargaining is the instrument of trade union organizations, and employers for that matter, where they can define the functioning of the labor market. Otherwise, it's the state. We don't want that. I mean, in ACTRAV, we've been having conversations about, okay, minimum wage, very important, but we want to talk about wages. Huh? And that's the role of collective bargaining. It's the role of trade unions and employers in their capacity to bargain. So I agree what you say. We need to have a balanced discourse in terms of saying unions need to be aware and embrace the agendas which are there from a social point of view and people are interested in, and they can have the capacity also to bargain and negotiate on those agendas, but they cannot lose sight of the fact that collective bargaining remains the main instrument that they have within their reach and that they are responsible for. And I agree that inequalities is what may trigger, and we're looking at the Americas now, for instance, and that's at the heart of the social movements we're seeing, and corruption together with inequalities. But I think that those are things that may trigger an interest on the part of trade union organizations, because we are moving towards what we said in the conclusions of our symposium, a world of unsustainabilities. A lot of what we're doing and the way we live, it's unsustainable. And the way politicians are looking at that is also unsustainable, because quickly they come down to the populisms and the nationalisms. And so the bottom line of all this discussion is that democracy is at stake if nothing is done. And of course, trade union organizations have a role in guaranteeing democracy, but also the quality of democracy. And the whole debate around inclusion, participation, representation comes back to the conversation. So in any case, this is what we will need to continue pushing forward in the work that we are doing in ACTRAV. And Yael, you can be sure we'll be knocking on your door a number of times to join us on many of these conversations, and I hope that you will be available whenever that is possible. Thank you very much. Thank you very much to all the colleagues who took the time to come. Thank you.